Hello, everybody. It's Mrs. Pound, and I am back with the last video for Chapter 6 on Advanced Genetics from BJU Biology's 4th edition. Our topic today is Section 6B, Population Genetics, and it's subsection 6.5 on eugenics. Our objectives are to define eugenics, describe current methods of genetic screening, and describe two methods of artificial reproduction. So, eugenics usually refers to attempts to improve the human gene pool. The term was coined by Sir Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, after reading his book on origins of the species. So it's based in evolutionary thought. And Galton thought that perhaps evolutionary methods could be applied to humans to improve the species. Now, although eugenics originated with evolutionary thinking, it was the basis for Hitler's policies. Hitler, he was out to purify the races. He wanted to get rid of bad races, which included the Jews and Gypsies and other groups as well, to purify the human race. And in fact, he was even working on making a superior human race by breeding individuals with qualities that he considered to be superior. However, its practices was also supported by American religious people and respected political leaders. It was part of the social gospel movement. Uh, people Christians supported the forced sterilization of individuals who had either mental or physical problems that were genetic. And so they thought that if they made it so that these people could not reproduce, it would improve the human race. It was also supported by respected political leaders. I'm going to read this. It says, I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding. And when the evil nature of these people is sufficiently flagrant, this should be done. Criminals should be sterilized and feeble-minded persons forbidden to leave offspring behind them. The emphasis should be laid on getting desirable people to breed. Now, you might think that that was written by somebody like Hitler, but it was actually written by Theodore Roosevelt in 1913. So he also thought that this would be a good idea. So basically, upper class American people at the beginning of the 1900s were in support of eugenics. Now, there wasn't much they could really do about it. There was the forced sterilization, but today, with some of our technology, this could really become possible because we do a lot of genetic screening. These are medical and non medical methods used to find information on an individual's genetic makeup. The first is a pedigree analysis. Couples, oftentimes, if they are concerned about a genetic disorder being in their family, they will consult with a genetics counselor and have a pedigree analysis done to determine whether or not they should have children based on the probability that their children may or may not be born with a certain genetic disorder. We also have ultrasonography and fetoscopes, and you're pretty familiar with ultrasonography as that's one of the highlights anymore of when a woman is pregnant, that getting those first ultrasounds to see the baby, to determine the gender of the child. And it's more than just determining gender, though. What they're really looking for are issues with the developing fetus to see if there are problems going on there. There's also amniocentesis. This is removing fluid surrounding the unborn child for analysis. It's done with a large needle, and they guide it with ultrasound so that they're not going to harm the child. And they're able to remove fluid to analyze it for chromosomal abnormalities, things like Down syndrome and other issues that could arise with the child. Chorionic villus sampling is very similar. This is where they use a syringe guided by ultrasound again to sample the tiny projections on the placenta that have the same genetic makeup as the fetus, and they are analyzed for chromosomal abnormalities again. Uh, these two things are generally done with women who are of advanced age that they are more concerned about, say, Down syndrome. Now, some parents use genetic screening as a deciding factor to abort a child with a genetic abnormality. And this is very unfortunate because as Christians, we believe that all individuals are made in the image of God, even if they are born with genetic abnormalities and may not live very long. However, knowing that a child has a genetic disorder can allow parents and physicians to begin proper treatment at birth, if not before. For example, if a child is known to have a condition like spina bifida, where their spinal column is actually open, they can have surgery actually in utero now, possibly, or a surgical team can be waiting for the child to be born so that they are immediately treated for this condition upon birth. So it's not always a bad thing. Like any technologies, it's how we use it that is the turning factor on whether it's moral or immoral. Now, the next topic, artificial reproduction, may make a few of you a little uncomfortable, um, but it's actually an important topic, and the Bible really does not shy away from these types of issues. As when we read the Bible, there are a number of women mentioned who have infertility issues. Or couples that have infertility issues. And so, this is something that you really need to think about before you even get married. There are issues that you should talk to with a fiance to say, hey, if there's infertility in our marriage, what might we do? What would we be comfortable with before you get married to make sure that both parties are on the same page with this? It's also important to talk about where your family stands on these issues. That if you were to become married and had some infertility issues in your marriage, what would your extended family consider to be permissible and moral or immoral? So these are important issues to discuss and decide about before you're faced with the possibility of such an issue. The first is artificial insemination. This is injection of sperm into a female's body other than by natural means. Now, this is done by thousands of women every year. It's been done since the 1950s, where women, for some medical reason or another, either with her or her husband, use artificial insemination to become pregnant. Now, the issues come in for Christians when the biological father is someone other than the woman's husband, because the biological father is the man who supplies the sperm for the zygotes of a child. Now, sperm can be frozen for a long time, so that's a consideration as well. Also, the question comes in is if the biological father is not the woman's husband, many people would say that that is immoral. Others would say that there's no breach of purity there, so it would be acceptable. So that is an issue for you to research on your own and decide, what do you think? Okay, that's between you, your Bible, and God, what you would think. And this would be something, again, that you would discuss with your family and a potential spouse. Another technology that is used is in vitro fertilization, and this is the union of sperm and egg in an artificial setting, usually in a laboratory. This is often referred to as a test tube baby, and this term is misleading because the fetus develops from an ovum fertilized outside of a female's body, but must be implanted into a uterus to develop. Now, with this, there is a biological mother. This is the woman who supplies the gamete for the formation of a child. And many times, the biological mother is also the mother who carries the child. Um, and a couple will use this because there are issues with infertility. And as I said before, um, infertility is not something the Bible shies away from. In fact, I'm thinking of Abraham and Sarah. They were a couple in the Bible. Abraham is a patriarch, and they had infertility issues, and God promised them that they would have a family and that Abraham would be the father to millions. Okay. And it wasn't happening. So they took matters into their own hands, right? And really kind of made a mess of things. Well, that's why you have to consider these issues as well. Like, if this happens to you, what would you do? And would it be acceptable or not? So, the biological mother, a lot of times, the uh, developing embryo is then implanted into her. However, sometimes a surrogate mother is needed, and this is the woman who supplies only the uterus or womb for a developing child. In this case, either due to the fact that the woman is unable to carry the child, or maybe she just does not want to go through pregnancy for some reason, a surrogate mother is used. Now, many people would say that this is immoral because it goes against the definition of a family and is outside of those boundaries. Other people may not have an issue with it. It just depends upon the individual. And again, this is something for you to talk about and decide. Now, another issue with in vitro fertilization is many times many eggs are taken out of the woman and fertilized. The doctor then will genetically test them to see if there are any abnormalities, and only a few of the embryos will be chosen to be implanted. So, a big ethical question that comes out of this is what to do with the other embryos. Many times they are frozen so that they can be used later if the mother decides to, or the couple decides to go through this process again. But there are many embryos that are just left frozen and never used. So, if they're destroyed, many would say that that's like abortion, okay, destroying an unborn child. And that would be immoral. So that is another factor to consider on your feelings on that and what the Bible may say about that. Also, another thing that is happening with these that I heard in the news a while back is that people are adopting those embryos for some reason. Maybe they cannot have another child, or they just feel that these children deserve a chance. um, they are choosing to adopt the embryos and then carry them and have them born as their children. So that is something because of this issue that is arising right now. So that might be another thing that if you are having issues in your marriage when you get older, and you might consider adopting embryos instead of just adopting a child. That is, and again, this is something for you to study in your Bible and decide on your own. It's between you and God. So, as genetic research continues to expand, Christians will have to make difficult judgments about the use of eugenic activities. Christians must be sure that their position is in accordance with biblical principles and is not merely a personal opinion or prejudice. So I would encourage you to carefully consider all of these things that I have just talked about in this video. and have the discussion with loved ones about these issues and their viewpoints so that you can um, develop your viewpoint on this. Also, as these technologies are advancing, Christians will also have to consider the fact that many people are pushing these technologies to improve the human race, the human species, because they think it is the answer to the end of disease and suffering and all of that. And yes, it can help with those things, these techniques, but we all know that there are issues beyond that, that we have a sin nature, and there always will be sin, and that really the issue isn't necessarily physical, it's a spiritual issue because we all have sinned. So there will always be problems in the world. Um, they will not be answered by eugenics or any of these techniques. There will still be problems due to sin. And so Christians need to be aware of that and be reminding people of that. Also, there may be pressure in the future to use these techniques to make stronger individuals and make the perfect people. But as we do that, as we've considered with breeding, we talked about inbreeding and selective breeding with animals, we have bred in a lot of problems. Like, could some of these technologies cause issues that we have not foreseen in the human race where we are dependent upon certain physical things now because we have altered ourselves so much that we've actually made ourselves inferior instead of superior. That is a possibility. Also, there will be the pressure possibly to have designer children, and Christians may have to decide that they're not going to do that because it goes against their beliefs. Um, and they may have what are considered to be inferior children in the future compared to others. So that is a possibility. But again, an important consideration is just that these techniques, we know as Christians, will not end all suffering. The only thing that will end suffering on earth is the return of Jesus Christ. So we have to consider as these things are progressing, what is honoring and glorifying to God in these situations. And so we have to have these discussions and turn to our Bibles to determine that. Now, don't forget your 5 questions. Keep watching this video to answer the questions at the end, and you have everything you need to study for the chapter 6 test.